Thank you very much, and it's a real thrill to be here. Probably more so because I want to give credit to Talbert. Anytime you can bring people together to make them understand the power of their voice or help them to understand their role and the role that they can have in government, I will always be the first person there, because it is so important to me that people understand that there is a place that we need you that involves government. And without your voice, we can't really get the true reforms done that we need to have done. Like you said, I'm just a Bamberg girl. I was born and raised in Bamberg. It was one of those towns you couldn't think about doing something wrong without someone already calling and telling your mom. So accountability was one of those things that you learned when you were growing up because you just didn't have the opportunity to mess up. I did go to Clemson and graduated in accounting, went and worked for a corporation as accounting supervisor and 7 of its subsidiaries, and learned responsibility very early. My family has a 32-year-old family business, so when I finished in Charlotte, I came back and started working for the family business. The way I got involved was pretty simple. I grew up and my mom said, don't complain about it, do something about it. And doing the accounting in our small business, government was way too involved. I felt like they weren't helping small businesses. I felt like they were a hindrance to small businesses. I felt like there was no common sense to some of the things that government was doing. So I decided to run. I didn't know at the time that you just don't run against a 30-year incumbent. Didn't think about it, didn't realize that was something you weren't supposed to do until I got into it, and then at that point knew I was in it too far and it was too late to stop, and so the only option there was to win. And I was very grateful when the people of this district allowed me the opportunity to prove them what I could do. And so I feel a strong responsibility to show them that they did make a good decision, and so that's why you see me fight for the things that I fight for. One of the things that I have been in the news for recently was my fight for on-the-record voting. And I want to tell you a little bit about how we came across that fight and what brought that on. We were seeing less and less votes on the record. And when you go to the House or the Senate, and if you've ever been to the State House, it's very chaotic, it's very loud, it's noisy, you don't know a lot that's going on. And so bills are constantly going across the desk. And they'll say all in favor, say aye, and all opposed, no, and very few people know what's going on. I've watched it for a couple of years, and typically, yes, there's that small legislation that goes through, but then there was the bigger legislation. And there were more instances that I was watching that important legislation was just being passed through on a voice vote. But it all came to a head when last year we were taking up a cost of living increase piece of legislation that we take up every year that deals with state retirees and police officers. And there was an amendment that was put in that would give legislators perks, retirement perks. That's not uncommon. We see that legislation go through. Legislators will try and slip something in there, and I don't judge them for that. I don't fault them for that. I just believe that that needs to be debated. The public needs to know about it, and we need to vote on that accordingly. When that legislation came through, in a split second, it was called across the desk. Typically, to get a vote on the record, it requires 10 people to say they want the vote on the record. We didn't have a vote on the record. It passed unanimously, which we were later able to overturn. But my point in that vote was I've yet to find one person that voted themselves a pay raise. Nobody will admit to it. And votes like that can't happen by voice vote. It has to be on the record. So the very next day I filed the 2008 Spending Accountability Act that said anything that spent taxpayer dollars needed to have a vote on the record. It was late in the session, fell on deaf ears. I knew that it probably wasn't going to get any traction that year, so I decided to work on it over the summer. And as I was working on it, I thought, wait a minute. It shouldn't just be legislation that deals with taxpayer dollars. It should be everything. You have the right to know how your legislator votes on everything. If it's important enough to be debated on the floor of the House, it's important enough for you to know about it. So the 2009 Spending Accountability Act dealt with every vote on the record. Anything that came up for second reading, which is where debate occurs, would be on the record. Any amended third reading, if they were to amend it in the final passage, would be on the record. Every section of the budget would be on the record. Conference committee reports, when the House and Senate have to compromise, should be on the record. All of those. Sounds like a no-brainer piece of legislation. Sounds like common sense. Well, this summer when I brought it up to leadership, I got a lot of resistance. We don't want this. We don't need this. It's not going to happen. And, you know, the one thing that we all have to go through is we have decisions to make. And there was no way that I could continue watching what I was watching and know that even something this common sense, how do we not give people the votes on the record? You know, the one thing I'll tell you is these seats don't belong to us. Well, neither do our votes. Our votes belong to you. For those of you that live in my district, how did you know how to vote for me? Because you don't know how I voted 92% of the time last year. You don't know how your senator voted 99% of the time. We don't want you voting for us because we look good in a picture or we hold a baby well. You need to be voting for us because we represented you the way you wanted us to represent you at the State House. So I got a lot of resistance to that bill from both chambers. They felt like it was unnecessary. They felt like it was going to cause us trouble. We don't need to do this. This is going to come back to haunt us in re-election. So I, along with my desk mate and suite mate, Nathan Ballantyne, said, you got to do this. We have to push forward. Why else did we fight for this if we're not going to get this done? So the two of us decided to push forward. It was brutal. They let us know that it wasn't appreciated. But the thing that made the difference at the end of the day was the public got involved. The South Carolina Policy Council came out with a report that said of all the House bills passed last year, only 8% were on the record. Out of all the bills passed in the Senate, only 1% was on the record. Governor Sanford immediately called, said, tell me how to help you. And so we got on a plane. The Policy Council, I did, Nathan Ballantyne and Sanford. We went to 4 different stops around the state, and everybody was shocked. They had no idea that their votes weren't on the record. And the best part about the story is the public got involved. They started writing letters to the editor. They contacted their legislators. They made phone calls. They did anything and everything and said, those votes belong to us. Give them back. And out of nowhere, we saw this issue explode. And the great news about it, and what I love, was aside from Governor Sanford getting involved, Lieutenant Governor Andre Bauer called and said, went out publicly, said he supported it. Comptroller General Richard Ekstrom came out and supported it. Senator Peeler said, I'll file the Senate companion bill. I'll do it in the Senate. You do it in the House. I'll help you. So good people came to the table. And last week, the rule that we proposed to do this, it passed 115-0 in the House, which just goes to show that when the public does something about it, legislators listen. Now, there's good and bad in what happened last week. The great part about it is, as of this session, all of those votes are on the record. Everything we need, you will be able to start seeing exactly what we're doing immediately. The negative side of that is, because it was passed as a House rule, because it was passed as a Senate rule, rules are controlled by the legislature. When it's a bill passed into law, it's controlled by the people. This needs to be a bill in law. We need to see the Spending Accountability Act passed. What we got and what the legislature wants you to be happy with is the fact that they did it. You'll start to see it. The Spending Accountability Act has all bills on the record. What we're lacking now is we still don't have uncontested bills. Well, uncontested bills are considered those bills that have debate. I still want you to have all your bills on the record, because what I may not think is important, you may find very important. So what I will tell you is House Bill 3047 is still very much alive. It's in the Ways and Means Committee. Senate Bill 11 is the companion bill. We need to stay on the legislators and say thank you for what you did last week, because I'm very grateful to members on both sides of the aisle. Let them know how important it is that we will now be able to see the votes. And because they saw the importance in this, let's go ahead and finish it, do it right, and pass this into law. So I think that's very important as we go forward. And, you know, more than that, in a time when we're going into a shaky economy and we're going into a red budget year, this really goes to the bigger picture of what is the role of the elected official that represents you. What do you need from your elected official? What should you expect from your elected official? And the number one thing that we need is responsibility. Your elected officials need to be responsible enough that when they see something wrong, they call it out, even when it hurts to do so, and they make it right. There needs to be some sort of accountability. Legislators need to know who they work for. I know for a fact there's no one in Columbia that votes for me. There's no one in that state house that I work for. I work for you. And while I may upset those people in Columbia, I know I'm doing my job for you back home. And that's something that we need to really remind elected officials that, yes, it's important to make friends in Columbia, but it's not so important that we compromise what we believe in and what we know to be right. Transparency is hugely important in everything we do in government. You will not see me say that we are ever transparent enough. I don't think we can get transparent enough. It goes back to the classroom. If you assume a teacher, the teacher walks out of the room, the kids are going to cut up a little bit. Why? Because they can. Not because they're bad kids. Nobody's watching. If we make every part of government transparent, from the local level to the state level to the federal level, we won't see the problems that we're seeing today. A lot of that is because of a lack of transparency. So you'll see that I think that's very important. But the number one thing I think that is mostly needed now more than anything else is just political courage. We've got to have legislators that understand that it's okay to upset those people in Columbia. Change doesn't happen if you're quiet. Change doesn't happen with compromise. Change only happens when you stand up and say, this is wrong, I'm not going to let it happen anymore. And that's hugely important. When we start to see political courage, we'll start to see that it's okay to sacrifice power for what you believe in. Principle is more important than power any day of the week, and I think principle at the end of the day is the one thing that's going to lead to good government, and we've got to make that happen. Your role as part of the public is probably the most important. You need to know who your legislators are. You need to know who your House member is. You need to know who your senator is. You need them to know that you're watching this legislation and that you care about what they're doing. You're the teacher in the room. You're the one that they know is watching them. And there's nothing that shakes any legislator up more than to know a constituent's calling them out on something, because they know that you're a vote at the ballot box. So pay attention and remember, somehow something got lost in government. All of a sudden it changed roles to where people forgot, we work for you. Our job is to work for you. I tell my kids all the time, I've got 35,000 bosses. My job is to make sure that I'm doing what you tell me to do. I need to listen to you. I need to represent you properly. I need to follow up and let you know what I'm doing. But that's not going to happen if you're not contacting me, if you don't let me know who you are. And what Talbert's doing today is so important, because you need to email or call your legislator. First thing they need to do is they need to contact you back. That's their job. They need to contact you back, and they need to know who you are, and they need to know what you care about. You know, everything that I said running for the legislature is true for you also. Don't complain about it. Do something about it. It's very important. I love quotes that are inspirational, and Thomas Jefferson said, when a man assumes a public trust, he should consider himself public property. We are public property. Our votes are public property. The office that we hold is public property. And everything we do should be transparent for you to see. And we need to answer. There's no question that you can't ask us that we don't owe you an answer for. And that's what we have to do when we run for office. The problems that we're facing today, everybody says, how did this happen? Bottom line, the reason we're having the issues that we're having today centers around spending. It's all about spending. You know, I'm very proud to be a member of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party will tell you, we haven't had one single tax increase. We've given you all this money in tax relief. And I'm proud of that. But I also know under our watch, when I was elected in 2005, it was a $4 billion budget. 2006, it was a $5 billion budget. 2007, it was a $6 billion budget. Every year it's grown $1 billion a year. But we didn't have any tax increases. We gave you tax relief back. What the Republican Party and the citizens as a whole are forgetting is it's growth in government. It all goes back to the growth in government. It goes back to spending. Just because a program comes across the desk that sounds like a great idea, there's a price tag attached to it. That's what we need to be paying attention to, is not tax increases, but it's growing government. Is it really what government was intended to be? Government was intended to just deal with the core functions of what the people needed. It was not to be all things to all people. And that's what we have to be careful of. we have to resist the urge to expand government by sacrificing individual liberty in our wallets. The bottom line at the end of the day, and I think that we have to remember that the goal of government is to secure the rights and freedoms of the citizens and provide just those core functions. Where do we start? There's a lot of things I think we need to be doing. On the record voting, absolutely. I think that's the number one beginning point of what we need to do is we need to make all our votes transparent. The second thing is I think all check registers for every level of government need to be online. You need to see how your school board's spending your money. You need to see how county council's spending your money. You need to see how state government's spending your money. All that needs to be online. There's no cost to it. The Comptroller General's office is doing it right now. There's no reason we shouldn't be doing that. If you choose not to look at it, fine, but I want it to be there for you to see. Spending caps, absolutely. We do it at home. We do it in our business. Why are we not doing it in state government? We should never spend more money than we did the year before. We have to have that. The other thing that we need to keep thinking about is how do we make every agency more accountable? We've got to go back to zero-based budgeting. Legislature, the governor's office, every agency needs to do what corporations and small businesses do, which is when they start their budget for the year, they start it at zero. And they say, what do we have to have? And then they go from there. What's government doing? They're carrying over what they did from the year before. Well, if you're doing what you've always done and continue to do it, you're going to keep getting what you've always gotten. And our problem is we're growing in the process. We're moving programs over just because we always have. But at no point are we ever evaluating whether it was an effective and efficient program. Was what was, program A in year 1, is it still good in year 5? Did it really do what we wanted it to do? Zero-based budgeting, what that's going to do is make you reevaluate those programs all over again. Make you see if we really need them at the end of the day. And I think that's important. I think we need to commit back to liberty. I think we need to commit to limited government, lowering taxes, and remembering that reform never stops. Whether you've been in the legislature 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, I think it's important that you have to know that change is important. We've got to keep changing with the times. 3 years ago, we had all this money coming in the door, and I think no one can tell you where it went. But if it were our household or it was our business, I know what we would have done with it. We would have put it in a savings account. We would have saved it for a day just like today because we know that money doesn't fall from trees. And I think government needs to know that. And that's the number one thing we have got to do is remind government that that's not their money, it's yours. I would much rather give it back to you than turn around and spend it and not be able to tell you what we did with it. And you should want the same thing too. I think it's time that we stop talking, we start acting. I think that we stop letting legislators say one thing and do another. I honestly believe that every one of the legislators that goes to Columbia goes with good intentions. They go there really wanting to represent you. The problem is the pressure gets too hard. Anytime they speak up, they're told not to do that. Anytime they start to think about doing something, they're threatened with a committee assignment. Anytime they think that there's something that probably should change, they really have good ideas, they think, well, maybe I shouldn't, because someone told them it wasn't a good idea. The political courage that we need is important, but the other side of that is when you see your legislator do something that is courageous, or you see them act in a way that you know is hard, thank them for it. Praise them for it. Because what's going to happen? They'll do it again because they know you've got their back. And when you see them not acting appropriately, you need to do something about it. And remember that just because someone stayed in office doesn't mean they should always stay. We need to keep them in while they're effective. So I don't want to do all the rest of the talking because I know that you've probably got some questions and there's nothing that I won't answer for you. But I just, if I leave you with one thought today, it is, remember that elected officials work for you. This is a time in our state where we need true reform. We need true accountability. We need to roll our sleeves